afternoon, and welcome to BAM Studios. I'm Henry Nguyen. I'm the chairman of Beacon Asia Media, the publisher of Bloomberg Businessweek here in Vietnam. I'm excited to have with me today as a special guest, Dr. Christopher Nguyễn, the founder and CTO of AITOMATIC, but more importantly, the organizer of this important AISC event here in Hanoi. Christopher, thanks for coming here to BAM Studio and talking with me, but also thanks for organizing this magnificent event. Can you tell me a little bit how it all came together?
Well, that's a long story. I talked earlier about the genesis of it. We had been organizing this industrial AI conference at Stanford. I think I must have invited you to one at one point when you were in LA. And then among the people that attend, they said, I think there's demand for one that is specifically at the intersection of AI and semiconductor.
Right.
So that was sort of the idea of that. And then deciding where to put it. Vietnam is my favorite place. So I was motivating the organizers, who are very experienced conference organizers, to do it in Da Nang. And you know how these technical conferences are usually in Honolulu or Phu Quoc. And so I said, let's do Da Nang. And then another conversation took place after the visit of the General Secretary of Vietnam to New York, right? Where, essentially there was an arrangement where Eric Schmidt and I had a private meeting with him. And to the credit of Mr. Nguyen Thi Dũng, then the minister of the MPI, he basically said, hey, why don't you do this in Hanoi, right? Because that's where everything is happening. And it took a long time for us to sort of look at the pros and cons.
Right.
But I don't regret that decision to do that at all. The NIC has been wonderful in terms of collaborating with us and organizing this, and we were able to bring, all of the important speakers and guests, and getting a lot of good response from people in Vietnam as well.
No, I'm glad to hear that. Look, you're bringing a truly global event, a world-class event with world-class speakers and AI experts around the world, and bringing it here to Vietnam. That kind of begs a question, which is where do you think kind of Vietnam's place is in this rapidly evolving world and revolution in AI that's happening around the world?
Yeah, so clearly, because of that story that you heard, the conference now has a dual purpose.
Yeah.
The primary original purpose was simply to provide a forum for the leading researchers like, Alpha Chip from Google DeepMind, like Dashan Shu, MediaTek and so on, to discuss what they are doing, and including what AITOMATIC is doing with respect to AI for semiconductors and semiconductor for AI. But it became a secondary purpose, and now becoming more primary, to say, how do we connect this global ecosystem that maybe Vietnam does not yet currently have access to? As you can tell, this conference is very different from the typical trade conference.
Right.
Right? Researchers are here to speak about their work and so on. So in that context, and I thought about this quite a bit, I think Vietnam, or any economy, and I've seen Malaysia go through this, I've seen Hong Kong go through this, right? When you're developing, you do go through phases. And one way to think about the phases is there's a phase where you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Right? And unfortunately, during that phase, you get exploited.
Right.
And then you get to the phase where you know what you don't know, which is very important.
Yeah.
As you know, you and I build businesses. When you know what you don't know, that's already 90% of the problem solved, right?
That's right.
So I think that's where Vietnam is getting to, right? And so knowing what you don't know means saying, I need something like this to bring, I need something more than what I've had in the last, decade or so.
Right.
So I think that's a very promising place. Then from the perspective of the region and of the world is very excited about Vietnam.
Yeah.
Right? In the face of economies that are virtually almost uniformly shrinking or even collapsing population, Vietnam is a bright standout.
Right.
Right. And because of that, believe it or not just Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore are looking to Vietnam for that talent pool.
Yeah.
Even places like Saudi Arabia, certainly America, right, are looking to this 100 million young people as a resource. Right. Now, I want therefore people to think of Vietnam more as a resource, but as a talent pool.
Right.
Right. Because you and I talked about this, it's not just the labor that's available, it's actually very dedicated to learning and education and so on. right? So I'm pretty excited about that potential of supply meeting demand at the high end
Right.
of a economy that says, I've learned enough, I've grown enough. Now I know what I don't know. Let's see what the world can bring to me, and let's see what I can bring to the world.
Well, then policy-wise, you're talking about this amazing talent pool that we do have here in terms of mathematical talent, programming, and computer engineering talent. Like, what can Vietnam, from a policy level and government leadership level, do to encourage and nurture this resource, if you will?
Well, I'm flattered that you asked me this question because you know this much more than I do. So if you're just collecting ideas, I will submit one or two. One is, again, it's good to look at relative to get a sense, right? I do feel that the policymakers in Vietnam today, the cadence, the perspective, and the commitment are qualitatively different from just 2 years ago, just 1 year ago, in a very positive way, right? I learned about Resolution 57 almost in real time.
Yeah.
And the takeaway I had from that was not all technical numbers. They're very specific goals and so on, right, for 2030 and 2045 and beyond. But the qualitative statement that was said, Vietnam needs to, this is coming from the General Secretary, like Vietnam needs to stop banning things that it cannot manage.
Right.
Right. And by default allow these things. So I think that sense of urgency and that sense of commitment, right, is now showing up everywhere. Yeah. The merging of the government departments, right, the ministries. This has been talked about for a decade, as far as I know, but it's finally happening. Yeah. Right. The commitment to advancing AI semiconductor, you see that on Policy Day on Friday, there'll be a celebration of the guests that are coming here at the NIC, attended by the Prime Minister. Yeah. So I think that sense of commitment alone and that sense of urgency and the realization that this is, in my view, a 1 in 4,000 year opportunity speaks a lot about the potential for policies. Yeah. With respect to specifics, in terms of the 50,000, young training people for IC and AI. Yeah. I think that's a wonderful initiative. The next step is essential to now get more sophisticated and not just AI and semiconductor, but what area of AI, what area of semiconductor, where can Vietnam build a comparative advantage in? And I spoke to this during my talk. For example, I'm very excited about the potential for AI to not just excel in, but lead the world in what is now called edge AI IC design. Yeah. Because I think the edge will become the center. Right. And that's something that is I refer to as a $0 trillion market. Yeah. Like there's no dominant player yet that you can play there. Right. And avoid areas that are so entrenched by global players that you have really no chances to squeeze in and otherwise you sort of get murdered. Right. Right. So I think policymakers are getting more sophisticated about this and looking for the right advice and the right advisors. Right. So I'm very optimistic.
Well, you've also done, you're an incredible leader in building businesses, and that's well known. But you've also put together this global AI alliance that you were, kind enough to invite me to Paris and had some wonderful dialogue events around the AI summit that the EU and the French government and President Macron hosted. Can you tell me even just how do you put something like that together? Because you're the real driving force together with some of those initial partners.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, but we're on TV, so so I should moderate the use of the term putting together. Yeah. It is true that we have some key partners that are large corporations, like large companies like IBM and Meta, that are very dedicated to the cause. And in fact, IBM took the lead in bringing everybody together. I happen to be someone pretty well connected in the industry, and so contributed quite a bit to bringing other players together. So in that sense, maybe a little bit of what you ascribe to me, but most importantly, the AI Alliance has been a wonderful collaboration platform. Yeah. When we first got together and said, let's do this. This was initiated by Anthony Annunziata of IBM.
Yeah.
I actually talked to Anthony and I said, you better make it real, because there have been many other very well-intended alliances where people get together and say nice things to each other. So I wanted to make it really very objective driven, very output driven.
Right.
And with the support of IBM, Meta, Panasonic, various other companies, there have been enough resources, and more importantly, enough heft, enough caliber, and enough gravitas to be able to bring others together. So the example of Semicon, which is the world's first foundation model for semiconductors,
Yeah.
would not have been possible without the AI Alliance.
Right.
We could individually apply our expertise, but people don't usually come together naturally without a platform like that.
Right.
And since then, there have been a lot of other output from the AI Alliance, and you will hear more.
Right.
And you were at one of these wonderful events where global AI leaders came and spoke about the cause of open and safe AI.
Yeah.
So that's what the AI Alliance is all about.
No, look, in such a rapidly evolving and changing marketplace of change in terms of AI, I imagine these type of organizations play a critical role in just making sure there's level setting, communication, and areas for collaboration. I mean, how have you found setting up this type of alliance versus typical sort of industrial alliance, sort of industrial type groups in previous time with different technologies?
That is actually a very insightful question, because I qualitatively feel that AI Alliance culturally has been very different. It has behaved much more like a startup, very innovative, very, basically in every endeavor that involves hundreds of thousands of people, you find that really there's about 5, 10, 20 people that put a lot of energy into it. And I think AI Alliance has been culturally appropriate, if you will, from the beginning, even though there's a behemoth like IBM or Meta involved, but the individuals involved are very much committed to moving very fast and iterating on it, right? Which is very different from, say, a standards body, right? If you think ISO something, something, something,
right?
There can be a lot of politics, companies jostling for position. It's very important to be the standard setter, right? I understand that. I've been involved in, for example, Unicode 1.0, right? I was the guy responsible for contributing to Vietnamese portion of that. This is 1992. And as wonderful as that output has been, that experience was very painful.
Right.
But AI Alliance, I think up to now, since the start, we've been very entrepreneurial, and I hope to retain that even as we become more gelled, more organized, if you will, right? And become larger and larger. But I think one of the key that drove that was saying we're output oriented. At AITOMATIC, I have this mantra. We have like 10 core values, but one of them is he who gets it done wins the argument. So I feel like AI Alliance is quite a bit like that.
Yeah. No, that's where a meritocracy, right? Where getting stuff done is really what is at the center, who has a voice. You bring up AITOMATIC, we interact a bit, but I've actually never gotten to dig deep about sort of all the work you're doing at AITOMATIC in terms of, your services and products and whatever clients now you're serving in different places around the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about AITOMATIC and where you are helping your customers and clients really, apply AI and become more fast-moving companies, greater, faster innovation, et cetera?
Well, I'll share with you something I've never shared with anybody. Like, what is my fundamental motivation for doing AITOMATIC in the first place? And I think in some sense you will share this yourself. AI as a technology wave, right? People would say, of course, correctly, that this has been a 50-year endeavor.
Yeah.
But what people have seen since 2012, and then much more recently, when the launch of ChatGPT and so on, it's very different from all of the other technology transformations.
Yeah.
I would say even including the internet, which is enormous. So much so that people like Sergey Brin, Bill Gates, Eric Schmidt, you name it, myself included, and I'm going to venture to say you as well, all say, I cannot sit this one out.
That's correct.
I cannot sit this one out. People that have got into retirement are sort of coming out of it. So I think there's a certain sense of excitement about that, particularly among people that are builders. Certainly young people, but also not so young people.
Yeah.
So that's, if you think about that, then I was an executive at Panasonic just before this. And so what is going to be my contribution to it?
Yeah.
Well, I've learned enough about comparative advantages. And I know I have a comparative advantage in the industrial space, coming most recently from Panasonic, and in particular semiconductor.
Yeah.
And the challenge in these industries, I know it applies to others as well, but most acute is the shortage of expertise, right? People are getting older, they're retiring, they're even dying, right? And young people are not coming, or have not been coming into these industries because of the deindustrialization, particularly of America, right? Everybody went into software. You walk around Silicon Valley today, you cannot have a conversation about Maxwell's equations easily, right? I understand people follow where the financial incentives are, but that is reversing. But it takes time to develop expertise, right? So I firmly believe, from my experience running industrial AI solutions, that is bringing these techniques and so on to our partners, members of Panasonic companies. I believe that we can make a difference there, not just for Panasonic, but for the world. And so our AITOMATIC's thesis is about codifying, using generative AI to codify domain expertise for the industrial world, for the semiconductor world. So that instead of having only 1, 2, or 3 experts that are retiring, you can scale their capabilities, you can scale their availability, you can scale their consistency. So we're solving problems that are not about replacing 5,000 assembly workers. Turns out that's not our AI is about. Our AI is about where there are not enough human experts, and helping to solve that problem. So I think that's really rewarding.
No, like, it's a powerful tool, and in this case, the application is obviously in the semiconductor field, and be able, like you said, to create these kind of domain experts to help solve problems, right?
Yep.
We're gonna have to sort of end on this, but what is it that you think Vietnam specifically needs to do when we're talking about infrastructure? Will Vietnam need to make billions of dollars in investments in data centers to make sure that we can have the firepower, if you will, to basically manage, all the sort of different AI models and agents that are going to emerge? What can companies do here in Vietnam to make sure that they remain competitive or stay ahead of competition? But what are some of your thoughts in terms of specifically for Vietnam, in terms of what it needs to do, maybe at a macro level, but also maybe at a corporate level for any company that's thinking about how AI is going to affect their industry or sector?
Well, I've been a corporate executive, large companies. I've been an academic. I've been a startup, founder. I love the startup part the most, because you can do, pretty much, you can move very fast. And so I like to think of these things in those analogies. So if Vietnam were a startup, I think there are 2 key strategies, or just fundamental principles to pay attention to. And that is, one is focus, right? And the other is comparative advantage, right? It's pretty clear that if there's no focus, no matter how many billions you deploy, it's going to be wasted. And focus, as you and I know, is a much easier thing said than done.
Correct.
So that's a big challenge. The second is comparative advantages, right? That one, you can identify fields that are either saturated or, at the top of their S curve, where it's a zero-sum market. Do not get into those things, right? But leapfrogging and focusing, right, the mantras of emerging economies. What do I mean by leapfrogging? Certainly don't look back and deploy the old technologies. I was very encouraged, as an example, to hear General Secretary To Lam talked about, in response to a question in New York, and they said Vietnam will invest in all kinds of alternative or renewable energies, including nuclear. Right. And the zeitgeist of people in the know, they say, yes, nuclear is actually has a much worse rap than it should have.
Good, yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a very smart statement. The high-speed railway commitments that are being now deployed, I think that's very positive for the economy. So I think those are examples of what I think is sort of good, sharp, focused choices, right? And then sort of avoid, driving yourself into the headlights of a very large truck. And so, but there are, I mentioned earlier, the physical world needs AI, and now it has it, right? It's coming. That is, the physical world, what we now call edge AI, physical AI, is an area where I think Vietnam can make a name in.
Yeah.
And that one takes primarily design talent. It does not take billion-dollar infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that's an area that Vietnam has a comparative advantage over South Korea, over Japan, over Taiwan.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that those are pretty good, reasonable bets to make.
Yeah. Well, let's end on that very optimistic note. But Christopher, thank you for coming by Damn Studios and having a conversation with me. Thank you for bringing this most excellent event to Vietnam, helping us all stay on the cusp of all the rapid changes in AI, and continued good luck with AITOMATIC and the Global AI Alliance. I look forward to staying on top of all the rapid changes and developments that are happening in this revolutionary field.
This has been truly enjoyable for me. We go to lunch and dinner and so on, but hey, this gives us an opportunity to do something like this.
Excellent. Now, thank you again, Christopher.
All right.